Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another live gig Q&A call. I am your host, James Cronk, from right here in gig headquarters in North Vancouver, British Columbia on Tuesday, August the 11th. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled with our guest today. Very excited about having Mr. Tony Adams from Hospitality and Golf on from the UK. If there is a question that I get more often than not, it is around food and beverage. When we are talking with our clients and we are talking about member satisfaction, customer satisfaction, food and beverage profit or loss, challenges, hospitality, etc., etc. If you're in the golf space, you were likely also in the food and beverage space. And so food and beverage and hospitality is always a hot topic. And I've been following Tony on LinkedIn for quite some time now. And I love his opinions, his provocativeness with his opinions, the dialogue that he creates. And so I can't wait to learn more about him. He and I have never chatted before, so this is the first time. So without further ado, please welcome our guest today on today's gig live Q&A call, Mr. Tony Adams. Tony, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me, James. I really appreciate it. Thank you. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. And I know it's a little bit later your time. So you are located where exactly, Tony?
So I'm in Southeast London. I'm in the Kent-London borders. So it depends on your viewpoint. If you're my wife, you'll say Kent. If you're the council, I guess you'd say London. But yeah, no, it's 7 p.m. over here. I'm looking out the window. It's glorious sunshine and the most glorious summer that we've ever had in the UK, certainly in my lifetime. So no complaint from me, James.
I love it. Now, before we get into the work today, before we get into it, did I not see a post just recently where you were trying to qualify for the British Open?
You know, even the blind squirrel, as they say, finds the occasional nut. Yeah, so I guess I'm a golfer at heart. I'm a golfer. I've played my whole life, and you could still, in inverted commas, suggest that I'm an elite amateur. I have a pedigree, I guess, but I would probably be over-egging the pudding to suggest I'm any better than just a good club player. And I play what we call county golf over here. I captain my county, which is Kent. And yes, this year I did make it through to you guys over that side of the pond would refer to it, I guess, as sectionals. I think is the final stage for US Open qualifying. So it's final stage for Open qualifying, and I made it through, and it was very cool. It was a very, very, very cool experience.
Well, don't discount the skill. You have to have some skill to get to that level of qualifying. So I guess that tells me, Tony, that you've probably had your fair share of meals in some golf clubs. And so tell us your journey about where you are today, but more importantly, how you got there.
Thanks, James. Yeah, cool. So, I'll go right back to, my dad, I was born in Liverpool, and we moved to Southport. So we had the Open at Royal Birkdale just recently. And so we moved out to Birkdale when I was probably, 6 or 7. And the Open came to town in 1991. Ian Baker Finch won. And my dad, for those guys who are aware of Scousers, was very Scouse and very successful, and wore a large gold Rolex and those kind of things. And you're like, right, lads, we're going to play golf because that's what you do, right? And I fell in love with the game. First person I ever saw on the golf course was Bernard Langer. He had this click wheel walking down the first hole, and I've been fascinated with the game ever since. So, my life has been golf, as a hobby and a passion and kind of what I do. But I went to university, and I studied engineering design, and kind of wanted to figure it out, wanted to join the British Army. War broke out in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I thought actually perhaps less appealing than I thought it might be. So I ended up saying, I'm going to move to London for a year just to kind of figure it out. And I went and made cocktails, which I was doing as a student, and I worked in the West End in a place called Leicester Square, and just loved it. It was such a cool place, such a cool time, and very lucky to meet the people I met. I shared pretty regular beers with a guy called Douglas Ankara, who created the Porn Star Martini, and Dick Bradsell, who created the Espresso Martini and the Bramble, and also the Russian Spring Punch. These are people I sort of hung around with, I guess, as a young bartender. They were kind of showing me the way of the world at that point. But like everything, you kind of grow up, don't you? And so I'd won this pretty sizable bartending competition over in Vegas, and I was like, right, this is it. I'm going to be a TV celebrity bartender because I'm young and stupid. That's what I am, or was. Well, I still am, just not young. So I ended up with a TV gig for a while, and during that process, I kind of met someone who owns most of South London now. He's a very successful chap, and I worked for him, and we swung some bottom lines pretty hard twice. Sort of -50, -100 to sort of +100. And again, like I say, I was young and stupid, and at this stage, I was 32. I said to my now wife, I said, I found this old Chinese restaurant. I want to give it a go on my own. So I sold the apartment that I bought, and the bank matched me, and I opened up, and I grew that to 4 sites, and I sold some over 500,000 burgers during that process. I'm very proud of that, and God knows what else beside. But had a lot of fun. But 2 years ago, which is guess how I ended up in front of you today, James. A colleague of mine, a friend, she does branding, and she said, look, I'm supporting this golf club, and they're moving from one name to another, and they've spent 1.7 million on the clubhouse, and they're losing 30-40 grand a month. They're not food and beverage people. They're not golf operational people, actually, certainly at that stage in sort of initial forays. And it was very clear to me, what was happening. But during that process, I was like, actually, I've been on my own for a decade now, and I realized that I'd learned perhaps more than I realized, and I thought, fuck, I'd like to give this a go. This is cool. So I posted on LinkedIn every day since 14th of May last year. Haven't missed a day, won't miss a day. And it's basically a podcast where a chap called Dickie Bush said, if you write a newsletter every week for a year, you'll change your life. And I ended up with writing a LinkedIn post every day for the rest of my life, I guess. And hey, here I am. So cool, power of social media. And but I guess what you need to know is, if you've missed the first few minutes of this, I'm a jumped up bartender who's who plays a bit of golf, I guess. So
well, and listen, I don't just have any bartenders on this podcast. I know that you've got a following, you've got work, you've got clients, you're helping people in the golf space, because one of the things, I come from a restaurant background before I became a golf professional. And one of the reasons why I feel like our consulting company has had some success over the last couple of decades is because we have an experience in food and beverage. And it is an area that many clubs just can't seem to get right. And there's, once again, we said this earlier when we were just talking before we got started here today. You would never open up a restaurant and say, I only want to serve 800 people. I need to be open, almost 24 hours a day. I need to have 3 different outlets. I'm going to also put some stuff on a cart and drive around the golf course, and I'm going to be open 364 days, whether I should be or not. You would never go to the bank and say, give me $1 million quid so I can go do that.
Right. And you wouldn't discount it either from that point.
Yeah, exactly. And all my customers want to pay under retail. So we know the challenges, but let's talk about what are some of the mistakes that you see in golf clubs? And Tony, our listeners are all over the world. I know you work in Australia. You work in the UK, but if there's one thing I have learned is that in my travels, it's that the issues and the challenges are universal. They might look a little different. They might be more extreme in one area than the other, but fundamentally, they're universal. And so what do you think are some of the kind of the key areas that clubs are getting wrong?
It's a great question. And I know we said offline that, I'm never going to criticize anyone because I think it is tough. I do.
So tough.
I think people measure it with the wrong ruler. I think people underestimate how profitable food and beverage is typically. I think that the genesis issue is, are you providing a service to your membership or are you trying to drive a profit? And everyone I speak to, James, says, I want to be in the middle. We're in a hybrid, which is cool, but you have to clearly define that. So until you figured out what you are, it's very, very tricky to lay out a strategy. And without a good strategy, you can't lay out good operation. And then you end up going, so I'd say that's the first issue I see. And, coming from the background I have, I'm very respectful and go, well, I'm an outsider. What do I know? But I'm looking at this going, that's a curious set of decisions you've made there. Like, why would you do that? And then it leads to the second question, the second issue I see is what I refer to as the trap of the loudest voice, where we say, hey, can we get this on the menu? Or it'd be great if we could do this. And you end up with these massively inflated and bloated menus trying to satisfy a range of demographics. And actually, you effectively aim at no one. You try and please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. And so, I guess my work, James, is sort of looking at it going, well, all right, strategically, this is what you want to achieve. Great. Okay, so I'll give you the first nugget. I was told by this chap that I work for, he said, Tony, if you're going to go and do your own thing, there's 3 decisions you need to make, and you need to make them really well. He said, if you make them well, you'll play a lot of golf, and if you make them badly, you'll spend your life behind the bar. And it was good advice. And he said, 3 decisions. What's your location? What's your offer? So what you serve and how do you serve it? And what's the geezer like who runs it? Okay, that's what he said. And I take that and I would say, okay, what's your environment like? Is it appropriate to the club that you are? Are you sweating this hard enough? Is work from home your thing? Is Sundays your thing? Is it more family focused? Have you attracting enough women? Yada, yada, yada. And then what's your offer? What do you serve and how do you serve it? Super tight to the club. What does the crest, what does the logo say? Is this the halo effect, like a great hotel where we want F&B to be supportive and an amenity? Or do we want to drive a profit? And totally cool either way, but just fucking define it, man. Be clear. And then the third E, so environment, experience, and empowerment. So what's your leadership look like and what's your team training look like? How do you build a genuine culture of hospitality? How do we focus on people first hospitality supported by tech? When I look at the world running towards digitalization and, automation, robotics and loyalty cards and app ordering and stuff like that, cool. But there's no substitute for people. I've just been to the local pizzeria. Great dude, great man. And I just looked at him tonight and I just thought, he's like, hey, Tony, how are you? And he doesn't know who I am or what I do. He doesn't care, but he gives a shit, man. Everything about the layout of the table, the guys behind the, open kitchens, the service, it's just great, man. And it's people. So, look, you asked me a question and I've just shot the shit, I suppose. But, they're the answers. They're the 2 things. You just figure out your strategy, man, and make some really clear decisions about who you are as a golf club, and everything falls into place from that point. So,
yeah, no, it's so true. Kind of gave me a reference to a couple things. I remember going to a club once and they had a food cost problem, and they had a exploded menu of all kinds of things, and going through the order list, like the invoicing of the month, right? And
sure.
And we were getting cranberries from a supplier, but that was the only thing that they were getting from a supplier. And they were literally getting, like whatever, a pound of cranberries a month or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? And so I said to the chef, I go like, so what are the cranberries for? He goes, well, they're for the whatever, this specific salad. And I go like, well, how many of those salads do we sell a month? It's been like 8, right? Or whatever. So, I go, so you understand, like, we have to process a check, we have to like set up an account, we have to receive them. We're probably throwing out more at the end of each month than we're actually using. Find a solution to those cranberries. Like, it's gotta, you gotta find either more things that need cranberries, or you gotta get rid of cranberries on that salad. One or the other.
100%. It's crazy, right?
The other example I love to give, Tony, and if people have been listening to this podcast, unfortunately, they would hear this story before, but I use it because it's so relevant to what you were talking about, which is know who you are, right? Yeah. And we used to manage a club that was a public facility, right? And the chef was all worried about the fact that his food cost was, 34% instead of a budgeted 32%. And I said, look, you're never going to get fired because your food cost is 34%. You're going to get fired if your food cost is 32%, but your food sucks. And every 10 minutes 4 people aren't walking off the first tee.
Yeah.
And then coming in afterwards and hanging out in the restaurant and hanging out with the staff and buying beers and sitting on the patio, because that's the business that we would never make enough money selling burgers compared to $100 every 10 minutes times 4, right?
Yeah.
Because we're in the business for that particular facility of experiences. And, last month we had a podcast, Tony, with a great guy, Ray Cronin, Club Benchmarking.
Yeah.
Work in the UK, great work in the UK and also North America and Australia. And, Ray was talking about the of 2,700 clubs, and we're talking about private clubs in this scenario, the average subsidy of dues to pay for food and beverage losses is 13%, right? So what that tells you, and what he also said was that the higher the subsidy, the higher the member satisfaction, right? That ultimately, the better the food and beverage experience, the higher the initiation fees, the higher the dues, subscriptions, what you guys would call them, right? The higher the stuff, right? So one of the things I've learned in going to the UK and going to places like Australia, and I mean this with all due respect about North America. I don't want to compare to North America, but that's obviously where we live and work most.
Yeah, sure.
I do find that club operations in other parts of the world are somewhat slower to adopt in those parts of the world, right? And in the UK, a GM used to be a secretary. There's still clubs that are run by volunteer boards, right?
Oh yeah. And
so I always say, just because Mrs. Smith eats in a restaurant doesn't know she knows how to run a restaurant. And so why do clubs protect this tradition, Tony? Like why do you think, is it a people? Why do you think people are so slow? Sometimes, not always. Yeah. Some clubs are slow to avoid change and to adapt. And what do you think about that area? Because there's a conflict there, right? If you're a GM and you implement change, well, guess what? 50% of the people might not like it.
Sure.
So why go through the headache? Why go through risking your job? Why go through the challenges and the feedback?
Sure. Look, of course, it's a great question that, it's a very deep question when you think about it. So where do I start? I guess the reason people employ me or work with me, James, is because I approach it like a restaurateur. I'm very honest about that. And I start with, who are we serving? What does that experience look like? What are their expectations? How do we deliver that on an operational level? And how do we achieve our financial goals, whatever financial sustainability looks like? And it really does arrive back to the same point. It's experience. And you have to understand that food and beverage is simply the monetization of the crack, the friends and family around the table. When you understand that, actually everything starts dropping into line. So I guess I can only speak for the UK largely. And, I will say that my experience here has been that secretaries, general managers, CEOs, managing directors are very, very well intentioned, and they show more care and heart and pride than perhaps I would see in the UK hospitality sector, honestly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. However, I would also say that they're particularly underskilled in this area and focus on cost management as opposed to actually what really matters. Just people, man, just friends and family around the table. When you understand that, when you understand what experience actually is, actually everything else is secondary. And, people talk a lot about costs and subsidies and stuff like that, losses. I just actually like to look at it as a cost of doing business. That's what it is. I'm yet to prove it, but I will one day, that the clubs with the highest correlation of food and beverage satisfaction are going to be the ones with the longest waiting lists. Now, I can't prove that today because of the COVID boom, but I will, because every sinew of my body feels like, cut me open, I bleed golf. I'm a golfer. I just want to be with my mates. That's what I want. I want my wife and my kids to come and have something to eat. Nothing better than the kids, hitting balls and knocking putts around the putting green and things like that. That's what it is. And you know what? If that cost me £8 for a Guinness, okay, what's the difference in 7 and 8 quid? Who cares? Don't care. Yeah. It's, so does that answer the question? I guess I'm, running off in a direction there, but, I'd say that is why people making mistakes because you just don't understand what this is meant to be.
And I think, it gets back to your very original point, which is being clear about your purpose. And I find that, and this is where it's difficult when you're a GM and you have a board and all they want to talk about is French fries and food costs, right? They don't want to talk about the fact that they've got a $8 million irrigation project that needs to get paid for in the next 6 years. They want to spend an hour talking about, why that you change the French fries and why, food costs is whatever it is, right? But without, and you call it crack, and I think what you mean is that people experience,
for sure,
that I call body heat, which is about no one wants to hang out in an empty building. And so you've got to have service, you've got to have ambiance, you've got to have great food, you've got to have some excitement, some events, you've got to have a reason for people. And the other thing we talk about is what restaurateur wouldn't love to have 20,000 people walk through the door every year that they get a chance to sell food and beverage to, that they don't have to attract, they don't have to advertise for.
I know.
Right? They don't have to, right? I mean, just the vibe, the people, the food, the vibe, right? So I love that. Let's get back in operations a bit, because the reality is that we still have to answer those questions for the boards and for our bosses and for the bank. When because you can have all the great vibe you want, but if you're not running your business effectively, if your fridge is full of food in the freezer that hasn't been written off, and if the person receiving the food is also signing the check for the invoice, you've got all kinds of other problems on your plate, right? So you talk about, I think you talk about the 4 Ps.
I do.
So can you explain the 4 Ps, but also beyond the 4 Ps? Where does this stuff show up? Talk about the 4 Ps.
So, okay, we'll look at operationally. So you got four problems: people, product, profitability, and partnership. And partnership is everyone aligned on what we want to get out of this, particularly voluntary boards and who is meant to be strategic and operational club management. Too many times strategic boards step into operation, and too many times operations dragged into strategy, and that's the wrong way around. So that's certainly the partnership piece. So people, right? Have you got the right people? Like leadership. If you haven't got the right people, you're going to struggle. You can have the best.
Let's talk about that for a minute, Tony. Let me talk about that for a minute, because there's no doubt that there is feedback and statistics that talk about the fact that this technology has diminished the people skills of a 20-year-old. And so how do you get a 20-year-old to work in your restaurant and your club that is servant-oriented, right? That is service-oriented. And so do you find that? And then if you do find that, what advice do you give to your clients about how to manage that?
So we're very well placed in the UK because we're incredibly cynical and almost bordering on bitter in times. And so we don't like how's your day, as we say, the jazz hands thing. We don't. We get quite uncomfortable about it. We like attentive service, but not intrusive. And so everything that I do is about understanding what the experience looks like from the moment you walk through the door, when you're greeted, and what are the steps of service that literally a machine can do, by the way. How do we build points there where you're forcing your team to be at the table? So I would always make the decision surrounding sauces and condiments. How do I love free water, just putting tap water on the table that's cold, typically in a wine bottle or a carafe or a jug, but it creates an opportunity to be at the table. And when you're at the table, it's like, do you guys need more drinks? I don't advocate for checkbacks. I was trained, in an American style of service where, the 3-chomp check back and stuff like this. And actually my view in the UK would be, no, our food fucking rocks, man. And I don't ask, I know it's good. I just go over and go, do you have all that you need? So these very deliberate cues that become script-like, forcing people to be at the table, by people I mean your team, when you force them to be around the table, however you lay that out, it's only what's right for you. You've got to take that very deliberate decision and go, the menus do this. Do our menus sit on the bar and we bring them over? Do they sit on the table and people pick them up? First decision, okay? So then what happens? What's the trigger? How do we send people to the table? That's how you do it. You don't do it by expecting people-driven excellence. You do it by process-driven excellence. A series of very, very deliberate decisions that make you go, hey, I just threw this whole thing on, but you didn't. It's deeply considered. That's how you do it. That's why, I say that people employ me because I'm a restaurateur. That's why, I understand who I'm selling to, what it looks like, what the operation is that delivers that, and does it make money? Yes or no? Or does it achieve the financial goal? Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Scott and I talk about design guest experiences, right? Where you fundamentally have a script, what music is playing. Yeah. I always say, if I go into a restaurant and I see wrestling on television with blood, guts, and gore, I'm like, I walk out. I turn around and leave. I go like, who wants to sit there having dinner watching people pummel themselves? But no one cares about the music. No one's watching the details. What's the volume, everything else. But and now you have scripts, but the scripts are a guide. Like, then you have to infuse personality into the scripts, right? But you still have to make sure you talk about dessert. You still have to make sure you try to sell an appetizer. You still try to make sure do you have everything you need, all the things you're talking about, right? But I always think that, look, as leaders, we have to be accountable for our business. So we can't blame youth of today. We can't blame the fact that people aren't service oriented. We can't blame the fact that members are high maintenance and expect everything for less. That is just the reality of our business. We, as leaders, we have to come up with the solutions on how to overcome it. So I stopped you at people. So what's your next P?
Is product. Does our food meet the expectations and standards of our membership, our visitors, our guests, our club, and even our team, right? So, what does you serve and how do you serve it? If you are very accessible, in the UK, we have incredibly accessible golf. We're very, very cheap to play. Our more traditional clubs have a different expectation. That's just who we are. Our clubs are sometimes 150 years old, which is great. So you have to make sure your product's applicable and it's relevant. I'm working with a group of clubs, and we did a great session today, and I'm saying, guys, I want quesadilla on there. I want to look at fish tacos, but actually what we're looking at is format, because that's kind of universal, right? Sharing and social, grab and go, topped and loaded, full service. We need to start looking at. So when I look at product, it's not just, is this, English breakfast or pancakes perhaps, or whatever it is, applicable, but it's then, is this applicable to the experience, right? Does this fit? I always say the same thing, James, is that if you can't get the coffee right, how can I trust your food? Yeah. So coffee's such a big deal. Like, there's a dude stopping at Starbucks on the way. That's a dereliction of duty, man. So that's your second problem. So your first problem is people, your second problem is products. And then your third problem is profitability, right? Like, have we clearly laid out our expected sales or revenue, the gross profit margin we want to achieve or food costs, and our labor margin? How much resource are we deploying? And is that budgeted for? Is it controlled? Because, golf clubs are crazy. It's okay to lose money. And in fact, you should, that's my view. But as long as you've got visibility. So if you don't have visibility of those numbers, you get that sort of very awkward meeting at the end of the month where the profit and loss account comes out and the stock report comes out and so on and so forth, where you kind of go, cool, didn't expect that. And it's that's where the problems come, and that's where the reactionary decisions come from. So I think that those three, the 4 Ps actually started life as 3 Ps. And, what I did was I wrote down every problem I could think of in a golf club and just put it into a little pretty framework, because it's easy to say and remember, right? But actually working with clubs, I realized that the partnership piece is really fundamental to it. And perhaps what you think is your issue might not be your issue. So you sort of look and go, our profitability is not where we'd like it to be. Well, actually, the reality is we've underinvested in our team. We haven't trained properly. We haven't held them to account. A large part of what I say is, what does good look like? So have we given our teams direction? And then have we given them the support, the training to do the job, and the tools to do the job? And then we hold them to account, good and bad. Are we holding people to account genuinely? Get them on a PIP, performance improvement plan if necessary. Support them, push them. You can't just let it go. People are too expensive nowadays. But when you get the right people, I find the numbers drop into place. I find that the product drops into place. I find that the partnership drops into place. I'm going to talk a lot about people because, it's a big exposure. From my data, James, which is very modest and very humble compared to, club benchmarking and plenty others, I see a 10% gap in GP. It's pretty close. Average is 62.7% for me. But I see a vast gap in people, 45% all the way up to sort of 113%, believe it or not. So all of that's totally fine as long as it's laid out clearly with a pencil and paper strategically and says, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're doing. So cool, I've ran off in the distance there, haven't I? Sorry.
No. I love it. It's great. You're sharing all your nuggets. I think that for our listeners, the takeaways there, there's lots of takeaways there. But what I like what you talked about there, Tony, is a couple things. I think let's talk about people for a minute, because
sure.
What I often, why'd you get in the golf business? Well, I love to play golf. Yeah. Why do you want to work here? I love golf. Oh, Jesus, that's the wrong answer. Why do you want to work here? I live close. That's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
Why do you want to work here? I love serving people. I love food and beverage. And I think that what happens too is that managers, GMs, we really have to be experts a little bit in everything, but not too much. Like I used to say, I can't grow grass. I know a good superintendent versus a bad superintendent, but there's no way I could do that job for a day. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you know enough about what the measurements are, what the KPIs are, what the expectations are, and I think what I love about what you're talking about with the partnership part is that if you haven't established benchmarks from the very beginning about what you're trying to accomplish from food and beverage at your club, it's going to lead into all kinds of conversations that are challenging with your people, with your board, with your bank, with yourself, right? Because you haven't, and like you said, there's nothing wrong with losing food and beverage if at the end of the day your members are happy, your initiation fees are achieving what it needs to achieve, your dues are achieving what you need to achieve. If your benchmarks are within a range of your other competitor, subset, whatever that might look like, critically important. And that's where we're talking about, when it's the same. We just answered the question coming up, which is when losing money is a smart strategy. I mean, we make our money on dues and entrance fees,
sure,
and green fees,
sure,
whoever you want to look at it, right?
Yeah.
The food and beverage part is supporting that core part of our business, right? We would never open up a restaurant on it. Well, you did, but I know you'd advise against it. Don't open up a restaurant on your own. It's too difficult. That's why, 3 out of 10 restaurants fail within the first 2 years. These stats are not surprising. So I don't know why a club would somehow think they're going to be different than that or somehow live different than that.
Exactly.
No, how do you advise a club GM that has a board that focuses on losses in food and beverage? What kind of, helpful hints do you give them to manage that conversation?
So I would say, okay, I'd sit down with an open, pencil and paper and say, okay, tell me all your problems. Okay, I'll ask a series of questions and figure it out, but it'll come back to something. And then it'll be like, ultimately people focus on cost when they don't understand how to drive revenue. That's my, revenue's holy water. If you've got bums on seats, you can control costs. That's the reality. And you sort of said it earlier, James. You went, well, if your food costs are 34 as opposed to 32, but members are happy, etc. Well, great, because price is what you pay and value is what you get. Too many people focus on the numbers and not focus on what matters, which is doing the right things. The money comes when you do the right things. If you make money your primary decision, your primary driver of your decisions, I think you're toast. I really do. It's a secondary service. It's not the main event. It simply supplements and supports what really matters, which is, why do you play golf in the first place? It's for friends and family. It's to improve. It's for social and community connection. I just think the whole world is running towards digitalization, robotics, and automation. And I'm stood there going, certainly, over here, the top end sort of Michelin starred, Rosette starred, restaurants, etc. The occasion places, they'll always have a place because they're special and they mark landmarks. And QSR, so quick serve restaurants, will always have a place because they're fighting on good, quick, and cheap, and which two out of the three you want, right? And the middle ground's dead, right? But hey, we're all yearning for human connection, all of us. And golf clubs are so well placed because we don't have to worry about that 30% for operational costs because it's already paid for. So when we're getting into the weeds over GPs and things like that, I'm just stood there going, guys, your food shit. Like, what do you want me to do? Stop being average. We're working around chefs. We're working towards mediocrity. No. We don't work around chefs. We work around excellence. If you do the right things, the money comes. Just blow people's socks off, man. That's all you've got to do. Look, I'm oversimplifying the incredibly complex problem.
No. I am such a fan to that. We think, look, this is a generalized statement, which is probably, I know it's true, but I might not have the data in front of me. But I can tell you right now that a board will pay more money for a superintendent than they will, generally speaking, pay for a chef.
Yeah.
Because in their heads, we're a golf club. We're about the golf course, and that's not a criticism of superintendents or chefs. Everyone has an important, critical role to play in the overall experience. But when I hear clubs talk about the fact that they're just a golf club, and look, that can I don't have a problem with a club that says we're just a golf club and we want our members to go elsewhere for their coffee and their toast and their dinner.
Sure.
That can be a successful strategy. It's one that I think is risky because I agree with you. I believe very much that when a person then decides, where do I have to spend my money? And they can't spend it with their family and their children or their friends, and they can't make a whole experience out of it. They're going to have to start making some hard decisions. And guess what's going to lose out is that kind of golf only experience.
Look, anecdotally, I agree with all that you say there. Just to pick up on a couple of points, one of the things I see is actually quite often strategic boards will go the other way and throw money at the situation and expect a chef to resolve all their problems. And that's not fair because you need structure around these people. Again, it comes back to clearly defined strategy. So that's the point. I would say, to your point about spending their money elsewhere, I just fundamentally believe you'll never have the best possible member experience without the human connection of, it closes the circle for me, in my humble opinion. And, I often say to people, and I appreciate it's different perhaps in North America, James, but why would you join a golf club when you actually look at it, when you can play at literally some of the best golf courses in the world in the UK for pretty modest money, for £200-300, which is a lot of money, I understand, but you can still pay it for a day out. You can go and play opens, and you can, there's lots of ways of playing over here. It's very, very accessible. So you don't need to be a member, but we join because it's bigger than ourselves. We're part of something. It's people. And, I'm kind of in on this idea that, in the world of where people are becoming so expensive to employ, we have this, walking in and, this halo effect that they have in hotels, or the third place idea or the third space idea. I want to walk in somewhere and someone says, "Hey, Tony, how are you?" I say, "Yeah, I'm great, thanks. How are you?" That's all I want. It's very, very simple. What would a hotel give to have everyone walking around with the Four Seasons on their shirt? But, I'm a member of Prince's Golf Club in Sandwich and also the Addington in London. And, everything I own has got this logos on, everything. And perhaps I need to update my wardrobe. But you understand the point I'm trying to make is that I'm doing it for those reasons. And it all boils down to, seeing the guys after I've played and my family joining me and the kids having fun and hopefully getting out of the game what I've got out of it. So I've stepped into some big ideas there and perhaps some even spiritual ideas. I appreciate that, but I fundamentally believe that there has to be a value proposition. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. Don't worry about the cost of something. Focus on what really matters: human connection, friends, family, having a great time. And as we say in the UK, the crack, it's an Irish term, but that's what it's all about, man. So
I love it. I love it. One of the questions I like to ask a club is what is the unique item on your menu?
Sure.
What event are you known for? And what's your secret sauce? Right? So
Cool.
So like, if you can't answer those questions, then to me, if you just want to start out, right? Like just start. I remember we had this club and we were doing the restaurant and we must have had like 15 burgers on the menu and one burger would be like 60 cents more than another burger. And I could never figure out like, why was it 60 cents more? Like I'm trying to figure out like, is the piece of lettuce that much like, and one of my pet peeves, by the way, when someone charges me, $2 for my wife's gluten-free bun, I always say, what's my discount for the bun that you just saved? I'll pay you half because you saved on the regular bun. So if you want to charge me the $2 for the gluten-free, but anyway, so I convinced them to do this Build Your Burger program. Okay. So we had a little card at the table and
cool.
And everyone got to choose whatever they wanted, right? If you want a barbecue sauce and mayonnaise and mustard and bacon and lettuce and tomato and mushrooms, it was the same price. Okay. Yeah. Same price. And I remember the food and beverage team were just losing their mind. They're just like, we're going to lose our shirts. Like everyone's going to load up. I go, no, they're not. No, they're not. Lots of people don't like everything on their burger. And we doubled the burger sales in the first 2 months, doubled, right? Really? Where we were making money. And I swear to goodness, our costs maybe went up, I don't know, a point or something like that, or 2 points. But the customer loved the whole experience because at the table, the server would then say, hey, if you love burgers, we have our Build Your Own Burger program. The card's right there. Put up whatever you want on it. We'll make it customized for you. It's the same price.
Amazing.
And the customer would go, what? Like, first of all, they'd go, that's unbelievable. It's like, I can't believe you're doing that. And then that was the story that led into, not everyone wants a burger, for goodness sakes, obviously, just one item of any. And it's just the same thing with events. It's like, what is the event that you do that every member needs to be at, that needs to make sure they talk about, that you have FOMO for, that you're making happen, whether it's a ladies' day or a men's night, or it's one men's night or one ladies, whatever it is, right? But where are you? And then once you build those things, you can start to expand out and add more events and more things in secret sauce, right? So I don't think clubs talk enough about what makes us different. Why would someone stay here than go to the restaurant downtown, right?
Absolutely. So a couple of points I want to pick up on. Five Guys is a great example of exactly what you've just outlined. Choose your own adventure, and they always have more prize than they need. And we all like to receive a little bit more than we paid for, certainly in terms of perception. So, fuck yeah, man, that's great. And focus on experience. And people are like, oh, we're going to lose so much on margin, but actually, we've doubled our revenue. Great. Trying to, there's this great thing. I've not finished the piece yet, but the argument is if you optimize the parts, you sub-optimize the whole. So if you want to optimize the whole, you have to sub-optimize the parts. Right. There's a great guy called Rory Sutherland in the UK. You should check, your listeners and viewers should check him out. He's very cool. And the idea being is that by sub-optimizing the cost of pickles, tomatoes, as you guys say, onions, lettuce, etc., hot sauce, whatever else, you're actually optimizing the whole. And I think it's a fucking really cool way of looking at it. That's the first piece I would say. I like it. You have to hold yourself to account financially. I'm never, God, I want to keep it tight. God, I do. I know how hard it is to make money in food and beverage. but there has to be a value proposition, James. There has to be.
Yeah.
Like, why did you choose this joint over the place down the road?
Yeah.
It's very simple. When I do member perception surveys with my clubs and my clients, I send out surveys. I never ask for feedback because, they'll ask for a faster horse, right? But I always say, what's important to you? Where do you eat? And 79% of people who respond to me say we like the gastro pub down the road. So, we're famous for our pubs over here. And as the UK culture changes from sort of wet led or drinking pubs to fancy restaurants that have a very sort of, public house feel, we like that. Mm-hmm. So now we're not in competition with the club down the road, which people think. We're in competition with the broader hospitality market.
100%.
So the value proposition has to be there, mate. You can't focus on the bottom line. You're optimizing the part. You've got to optimize the whole by sub-optimizing the part. So anyway, look.
We say, no, it's all good. We say it all the time. You can't cut your way to success, right?
No.
You can't cut your way to success. You better be all in and make it work, or guess what? They'll find someone that can. The other thing I was thinking about when you talk about that kind of memorable value piece, right? Like,
yeah,
there's people right now paying, I don't know, $900 US to play Pebble Beach, only if you pay $1,200 a night to stay on property, right? And you go to Royal County Down and play. You're going to pay £600, to play a golf course if you're not a member. If you're from away, right?
Yeah.
Scott and I were doing some work with the TBC network, and we were lucky enough to be at TBC Sawgrass a month or so ago, and we're sitting on the patio, and there's this. Well, it turned out to be a pretzel, right? That was on the table, a huge pretzel, like a pretzel that took up the entire table. And I'm like, what the hell is that, right? And of course, no one looks at the price of the gigantic pretzel. It is a feature item that you can see there was pretzels all over the place. Yeah. Like that was the starter appetizer, right? If you go to TBC Sawgrass and you're in the clubhouse, you're going to order the pretzel, right? Because it's an experience. And no one. I love what Ray Cronin's quote from last top. When he talks about, when you're handing over that initiation check of 50,000 euro or pounds, no one says to the membership director, "How efficient are you?" What the food cost at the restaurant, right? Yeah. They don't give a shit about that, right? They care about the experience and about how it makes them feel, like the things you talk about. And we've got to get better at educating our boards and our owners about the value of what you're talking about, right? And because that is the secret sauce of understanding that food and beverage. Now, you also can't overcharge. You can't have shitty service. You can't have dirty plates. You can't be boring. You can't. You have to have all those things, right?
Yeah.
You don't justify that, right?
Yeah. James, can I just make a point?
Please.
I don't wish to cut across you there. But you're right. Like, you can't compete on anything less than excellent, because the place down the road will be excellent. So it's the standard. Perhaps when I was younger, the food there is great. No, the food's great everywhere, man. The service is great there everywhere. I would say, maybe that I should have answered this earlier in the pod, but too many golf clubs allow mediocrity to creep in, because under the proviso or the sort of pretense that we're a golf club and that's what our members want, and they'll only pay this. Bullshit. That is not true. We have to look at the broader hospitality market. We have to look at what people are spending their money on. We live in an experience-led economy globally. No one wants stuff. People want to do stuff. That's what they want. I'm going to Ireland next week. I'm playing 4 bucket list golf courses. One I'm playing twice. And my wife's next door and I wouldn't tell her what I've paid. And I'm going to spend however much on t-shirts that have got logos on, because I'm just an idiot. But I'm doing it because, I've worked my tail off all year, like we all do. And that's why, right? And so, look, boards have got to hold themselves to account. If you say, oh, no, our GP is great, but we're selling no tuna sandwiches, because they're crap. You're much better. I talk a lot of hero architecture. I talk a lot about pushing like, what can we do? We only sell 5 things in the UK, actually: sausage rolls, bacon baps, burgers, club sandwiches, and pizzas, maybe a handheld, something like that. There's, everywhere I go, it's the same things. So I focus on hero architecture. How do you make them epic? That's how you drive revenue, man. That's how you drive it. Then manage to those numbers. Just manage to them. So, look,
I did a site on a couple of weeks ago, and the hot dog was one of the worst hot dogs I've ever had. and I don't even, I mean, I like a good hot dog, but I had to have a hot dog because that's part of my site audit. And I'm like, how can you have a crappy hot dog at a golf course? Like, hot dogs and greens. I mean, you got 2 things you got to get right? Greens and hot dogs. And then the rest of it, you got to make sure also is right.
So I'll give you an example. I am considering getting on a plane to San Francisco to go and have a burger dog. Genuinely. Like, I would be doing myself a disservice as a human being, as an avid golfer, as an F&B consultant, if I didn't go and check this shit out, man. Yeah. And, I'll give you an example of I went there last June, the most incredible place. It's called Royal Wellington and Newmarket Golf Club. It's a 9-hole golf club. It is the most traditional place you'll ever meet in your life, or go to in your life. And it's the home golf club of the Cambridge University, the Blues, right? So Harry Colt was the first Cambridge captain to, and they've got a cocktail called the Pink Jug. And I would urge anyone to just Google it. I wrote an article about it last year. It's so traditional. It's so quintessentially British. It's eye-wateringly British. It's off the top of my head, brandy Cointreau, a bottle of champagne, something else, served in this like cranberry glass jug.
Okay.
It's just like, it's just been left alone for 100 years. They've just done nothing with it except serve it. And it's just, signature serves and things, we'll all try and manufacture it, but it's just so much better when it's authentic, man. It's so much better when it's just like, they haven't tried to optimize the price on it or cut back on cheaper champagne. They buy a champagne from down the road, which is actually an English sparkling wine, but you understand the point. Yes. It's just like, we've been doing that for 50 years. Why would we change that? Yeah. And I will crawl over 6-inch nails and broken glass to go and have one. I would stay at a hotel locally because I want to have that cocktail and I can't have it and drive home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, the same dudes want to get on a plane at Heathrow and fly 10, 12 hours to San Francisco to drive to Olympic Club to have a fucking hot dog. And I probably won't even be allowed to go on property. So I'd have to send a nice email. You know what I mean? It's just like,
100%. I'm not going to bore people with I'm not going to bore people with my Skittles story again, but one of the things that you wrote about and we were talking about just now, right, is the halfway house, right? The halfway house experience. And
yeah,
I am at a loss to understand why they are not way better, like just way better with, and that being said, when I find one that's way better, I love it. Like, I love it when I find one that does pizzas or that does whatever, customized sandwiches, or they have
sausage and things like that,
or pepperoni sticks that are from a local market that are fresh that you can't get anywhere else. Like, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to have 500 things.
No.
But just don't be boring.
So street food has taught us one thing, or taught us something. You can serve one thing. If it's epic, you've got a business.
Yes.
Halfway Hut is, I talked earlier about the commercialization of an experience, right? That's what food and beverage is. It's monetization of this, right? And Halfway Hut is an example of time poor people, perhaps they've got to get back to busy lives for any reason. And they go, I still want that treat. So if we can stop for 15 minutes and grab, that pepperoni pizza or, the Sunningdale sausage or whatever it might be, I have this silly thing called the sausage roll index over here where I sort of, worth a stop, worth a detour, worth a green fee, 1, 2, or 3 stars. And I have a bib gourmand for great value. And because I'm an idiot, but it's fun, right? And it's, I want to have a beer with my friends because the missus has said I need to get back because we've got to take the kids to, to football or soccer practice. Do you know what I mean? You're fulfilling an experience. And so, yes, to your point, and I'm very intrigued by Japanese culture where, you play 9 holes, you stop, you have lunch, and you play another 9 holes. That's really interesting to me. What does that experience look like? That's cool, right? So, yeah, you're right. Halfway huts. Yeah, cool. It's just feels like golf, man, doesn't it? It stinks of golf, which I love. So,
well, who wouldn't want a member to show up with their guest and say, you've got to have this? Hey,
practice.
when we, thank you for coming with me. Here we are. We're at the halfway house. Let me buy you this. You have to have it. It's the best. It's the best taco ever, or it's the best whatever. There's a club in Ontario, in Canada, that I went to many years ago. But I think they must have had 45 different versions of a hot dog. But the thing that I remember the most is that they made their own bun.
Wow.
And their bun was like those stand-up tacos. It's like it was flat on the bottom and then bread on the side. Yeah. So like the hot dog literally sat right in the middle. Yeah. It was the most brilliant thing ever, right? And then they went to town on hot dogs. It's a great example. Okay, we only got a few minutes left. What is one bold, concrete move a club could make in the next 30 days to transform their F&B?
Two numbers that I love to monitor: average transaction value, and so spend per head, and capture rate. So first thing I look at is not sales GP and labor, because any accountant can tell you that. I don't care, don't give a shit. What I want to know is what's happening. So if James and Tony go and play golf, if 4 hours later or whatever your tea time is, one of our two names are not on the till system having purchased food or beverage, why?
Yeah.
So I would look at those two numbers, and then I would look at transaction value and go, are we missing an opportunity here? Seek out opportunity, fight for them, grab and go, sharing in social, top to like whatever the format is. I'm talking very British terms here, but the point translates and travels. It's like, what have we got to do to get those guys to grab an extra beer? I know that in the UK, the behavior of golfers is the same, whether it's Royal St George's or whether it be, a pay and play down the roads. People drink the same amount. What changes is the coffee and the food. I'm seeing that 3.2 times deltas on coffee, 3.5 times deltas on food. So people drink more when they buy food, and that's sort of post-round capture. So look at what's happening after the round. And if they're not, because they've got to get back to busy lives, cool, totally fine. Mm-hmm. Just answer that question. That would be what I would do. Look at those two numbers. They'll tell you a lot. And like everything, if it gets measured, it gets done. So
yeah, can't be measured, can't be managed. I'm going to give a shout out to my side on criticized the hot dog last time, because here's the example of what was positive. And this is what pisses me off about golf shops. When I checked into the hotel, front desk, here's everything is. Can I make your reservation in the restaurant for later on? Right? Not an uncommon experience when you check into a hotel.
Sure.
When is the last time you have ever been in a golf shop, paying your green fee, and the staff behind the counter have said, hey, you're going to be done in 4.5 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever it might be. Would you like me to get you a table on the patio? Never happens. Never happens, right? We used to, one of the things we used to do was we used to give our marshals, they're called player assistants and ambassadors and all kinds of other way better terms than the sheriff. But we used to give them coupons for shot of the day.
Amazing. Wow.
And it gave them a free plate of nachos. And so they would drive around and they would drive up to the group, and the group would be like, we're playing fast. And they go, no. I want to just tell you, Mrs. Smith, that, that shot you hit over the pond on hole number 12 is the best shot I've seen today. You just won today's shot of the day contest. Well, obviously, they're going to go on to the restaurant. They're going to buy a bottle of wine. They're going to have the nachos. Maybe they'll also have lunch. And then she's going to tell every single one of her friends that she got shot of the day. It's the simplest thing ever, right? And I tell people, like, why are you not doing that? Steal that. There is no shortage of great ideas out there about stuff that people can do. Tony, we're at the end. So before I get people you give people your contact info, I love today's conversation. We could have gone on for another hour. I really invite people to follow you on LinkedIn, because you do post nonstop and great stuff. And you post opinions, which I even love even better. It's not just kind of, rah kind of crap. So what's the best thing you've seen at a club, I guess, in the last year? What's some example that you've seen that really you're like, oh, I love that. I think every club should do that.
Great question. I think the clubs that are getting it right over here, I would urge if you gave me one round of golf outside the old course doesn't count because you can't go in the R&A clubhouse. I'd go to Royal St George's, and because I love the golf course, it's not too far from me. It's about an hour's drive, and the lunch afterwards feels very special. You put a jacket and tie on, and service is amazing, and the food's amazing, and it's 3 courses, but it's actually part of the green fee. So of course you paid for it. We all know that, but it just removes that barrier. So I would say that. And the other club that I point to is the Wisley, which is a more modern offering, or more modern club in South London near Guildford and Woking. And it's headed up by a chap called David Shepherd, who's just one of the best human beings and a fantastic club manager. And their members describe it as the best restaurant in Surrey, which is a county. And they just get it right, man. Svetlana behind the jump there, as we would say, she can tell you 100 members' coffees, flat white, this milk, like just apex stuff. So yeah, just please, if you take one thing from what I say, do the right things and the money will come. Don't focus on price. Focus on making people feel special and valued, and do the right things, man.
Love it, Tony.
I'll be out of a job.
I love it. How can people get in touch with you?
Listen, please check me out on LinkedIn. I've had an account for 18 months, and I'm going to pass 11,000 today or tomorrow followers, which is just great. So,
awesome.
It's been a lot of fun. It's helped me formalize my ideas. So when I have conversations like this, I can say shit, and it's not just trapped up in here, but also it keeps me honest. I wake up every single morning like I did today, and I don't have a clue what I'm going to post tomorrow. I think I might post about that local pizzeria I mentioned earlier. But I don't know. Yeah, because it gives a shit, man. And I love that. So please follow along for the journey. And if you'd like me to, have a chat with you, then please shoot me a message on there. That'd be awesome. Thank you, James.
Tony, thanks so much for joining us. Loved having you, man. Great stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening and watching this month's Gig Q&A call. As always, next time we'll see you on the inside.